one night, one bite, a kingdom nearly lost. The scent of roasting venison, bay laurel, and stale ambition hung heavy in the high-ceilinged great hall of Castle Aldermount. King Alder, a man whose 45th year had settled upon him like an ill-fitting suit of mail, sat at the head of the long oak table, his gilded chair the only thing separating him from the cold, unforgiving stone of his own fortress. Tonight was meant to be a celebration, a peace banquet to formally dissolve the simmering hostilities with the barons of the northern marches. Instead, it felt like a prelude to a hanging. Alder was a king forged not by the romantic glow of legend, but by the relentless, brutal grind of realpolitik. His father, the charismatic King Theron, had united the fractured realm of Viridia, but Alder had been left the unenviable task of keeping the volatile thing from splintering. The last 5 years had been a brutal, unceasing campaign of attrition against rebels, against the encroaching northern clans, and most taxing of all, against the relentless greed of his own court. He adjusted the heavy gold circlet, a crown, less a symbol of majesty and more a weight pressing down on his temples. The jewels were dazzling, but Alder knew their true worth was measured in the lives they had cost. Across the table, the guests were a tapestry of loyalty and betrayal. There was Baron Alaric of Northmarch, a man of granite and grudges, who, just 3 months prior, had been marching his own levies against the crown. Tonight he wore a velvet tunic, a veneer of civility over his warrior's buck, and drank from a silver chalice as if anticipating the wine to turn sour. His presence was the most immediate, agonizing proof of the night's brittle truce. Next to Alaric sat Mistress Lyra, the king's seer. She was a woman of uncanny stillness and startling blue eyes, who had traded her youth for influence. Though her title was merely advisor, many whispered that she held the true reins of the court, her prophecies guiding Alder's hand in war and peace. Tonight she ate nothing, merely observing the flickering tallow lamps and the shadowed faces. Her expression was the only true alarm the king had felt all evening. "My lords," King Alder said, his voice husky from a day spent barking orders and planning defenses. He raised a cup of sweet, spiced Bordeaux wine, the red liquid catching the light. "To the peace! May the rivers of Viridia flow with water, not with blood." A chorus of "Huzzah!" echoed back, but it lacked conviction, sounding more like a muffled sigh. He took a deep, reassuring draught of the wine. It was rich, warming. A momentary sense of victory, however fragile, settled over him. Tonight, he thought, I have done my duty. Beside him, his young son and heir, Prince Edric, barely 14 years old, shifted uncomfortably. The boy was too pale, too slight, with a scholarly disposition that preferred the quiet of the library to the clamor of the tournament field. Alder loved the boy fiercely, but worried about his fitness to rule. The wolves will devour him, he often thought, watching the court circle his son like vultures. It was then that the first disruption occurred, not a loud, violent one, but a small, sharp intake of breath from Lord Cassian, the royal chamberlain, a man known for his robust constitution and meticulous nature. He was reaching for a piece of freshly baked rye bread when his hand suddenly froze mid-air. A bead of sweat trickled down his temple, even in the cool hall. He swayed slightly,
a tremor running through his frame. Then, with a low, choking sound, he gripped the edge of the table, his eyes widening in a silent, terrible realization. His polished silver fork clattered to the stone floor. Before anyone could move, before Baron Alaric could snort or the Queen could gasp, Lord Cassian slumped sideways, his body convulsing once sharply, and then utterly, terrifyingly still. The only sound in the cavernous hall was the crackle of the great central hearth. The banquet, the peace, the crown, all shattered in that single, horrifying moment. The air, once heavy with spices, now felt thin, toxic. King Alder dropped his goblet. The red wine splashed across the white linen tablecloth, looking exactly like fresh blood. "By the saints," he whispered, his own heart hammering against his ribs. What devilry is this?" Mistress Lyra, the seer, finally spoke, her voice low and chillingly clear, cutting through the sudden suffocating silence. "It is not devilry, Your Majesty," she said, her gaze fixed on the slumped figure of the chamberlain, but her words aimed directly at the king. "The Black Banquet has begun." The silence that followed Lord Cassian's collapse was a living, suffocating thing, stretching the seconds into an eternity. It was the sound of 90 noble hearts realizing simultaneously that their carefully constructed world of chivalry and political maneuvering had been punctured by a raw, ancient terror. King Alder, though stunned, was the first to regain his command. Survival, after all, was his trade. His gaze swept the table, a rapid calculation of threat and opportunity. "Guards!" he roared, slamming his fists on the table so hard the heavy silver platters jumped. The 2 royal wardens, veteran men-in-arms, known as the Twins, for their fierce loyalty and matching scars, moved instantly. With a grating sound of steel on stone, the massive oak doors of the great hall, which had been propped open, were swung shut and barred from the inside. The click of the heavy iron bolts echoed like the finality of a grave. The assembled nobility, barons, counts, and minor lords who usually bristled at even the slightest infringement on their liberty, were frozen. The fear was too immediate, too personal. Baron Alaric of Northmarch was a monument of suspicion. He had pushed his chair back violently, drawing his short eating dagger and holding it low, his eyes darting between King Alder and his own northerner retinue clustered near the end of the table. "This is a king's welcome, is it, Alder?" Alaric's voice was a low growl, thick with accusation. "Silence, Alaric." Alder's voice was steel, cutting through the rising panic. "The man is dead. Your men have eaten the same meat, drunk the same wine. If this is a trap, it is one that ensnares us all." He pointed a trembling finger at the still, lifeless body of the chamberlain. "Lord Cassian, my trusted chamberlain for 20 years, is struck down in his own hall. Does that look like statecraft, Baron, or does it look like murder?" The distinction was crucial. Statecraft, like a declared war, was understandable. Murder in the sanctuary of a king's feast was an act of profound, disruptive sacrilege.
Alder motioned urgently to Master Elias, the royal physician, a small, stooped man in spectacles who had been attending the Queen's retinue near the middle of the table. Elias hurried forward, his face already greased with professional dread. "Elias, examine him, now. What killed him? A fit? A sickness? Alder demanded, already knowing the answer would be worse. Elias knelt beside the body, his practiced fingers immediately touching the cold skin, examining the fixed, wide-open eyes. He lifted the tunic and probed the midsection, then peered closely at the man's mouth and fingers. The physician stood up slowly, wiping his hands on a linen cloth provided by a horrified steward. His voice was low, but resonant enough for the unnerved assembly to hear. Your Majesty, Lord Cassian died swiftly. His symptoms, the rapid convulsions, the lack of struggle, and observe, if you will, the faint blue tint around the lips and fingertips, are consistent with a powerful, fast-acting mineral poison. A collective intake of breath swept through the hall. Poison! The very word was an admission of treachery, of cowardly Black Alley murder brought into the light of the crown. A mineral poison. Alder gripped the edge of his chair, his knuckles white. Arsenic? It is possible, sire, but too fast for the common dosage. This was sophisticated, potent. It was administered recently, minutes before the collapse. And crucially, Your Majesty, it was not airborne. It was ingested. This confirmation was a spark to the powder keg. Every noble instinctively looked at his own plate, his own complet. The lavish feast, minutes ago a symbol of wealth and peace, was now a potential death trap. The wine, whispered a lord, the communal wine, we all drank from it. The bread, countered another. The bread was passed round the table. Prince Edric, pale and shaking, turned to his father. I didn't drink, father. The wine was too spiced for me. Alder didn't hear him. His eyes were drawn back to Mistress Lyra. She remained seated, her silver circlet undisturbed, her composure absolute. She was the only person in the hall who did not appear surprised, only grave. Mistress Lyra, Alder said, his voice dangerously even. Tell me, who? Tell me now, before I put every soul in this room to the question. The seer met his gaze unflinchingly. I see shadows, Your Majesty, not names, but I saw the method. Look not at the enemy who has just signed a truce, but at the servant who serves the flood. Lord Cassian was not the serpent, sire. He was the bait. Her words hit Alder with the force of a physical blow. The bait. The poison was not meant for Lacan to frame him. It was meant for the king. Cassian had merely taken the fatal portion meant for the head of the table. He looked down at his own untouched trench of rye bread, the same kind Cassian had been reaching for. Elias, Alder ordered, his voice now a strained whisper. Take the bread basket. Take the king's wine. Take everything from the stable. Test it all, and take the body. I want to know where the poison was hidden, where it was mixed, and who was closest to the source. The wardens escort Headmaster Elias and his apprentices away with the ghastly evidence, leaving behind the locked hall and the sweating assembly. Alder stood, drawing himself up to his full, imposing height. He was king not because the people loved him, but because he was the center of power. He needed to project absolute control, even as chaos churned in his gut. Hear me, all of you, he commanded. You are all suspects. You are all witnesses. Until the source of this treachery is found, Castle Altamont is locked down. Every garrison is doubled. Every exit is watched. He turned specifically to Baron Alaric, whose eyes were still smoldering with resentment. Baron, your men will be confined to the east wing. Mine will be confined to the west wing.
No communication, no movement. You came for peace. You shall have it, one way or another. You're making a grave mistake, King Alder. Alaric hissed. Confine me, and you ensure the world assumes the moment I am free. Perhaps, Alder replied, a cold, hard glint in his eye. But I will not be poisoned for the sake of an unstable peace. I will find the person who did this. And I assure you, Baron, whether it is one of your men or one of mine, they will learn that the penalty for attempting to poison the crown is worse than any battle. Alder looked around the hall at the faces of his most trusted advisers, his own family, and his greatest force. All of them now wore the mask of fear and suspicion. The banquet had become a prison, and the king realized with a chill that reached his marrow that the poisoner was still among them, watching, waiting for the next opportunity. He needed an investigator, someone ruthless, sharp, and outside the immediate political web of his court. Who is the serpent? The question burned in his mind, and the answer, he knew, would likely be more terrifying than the poison itself. The king's private solar, a small dark room adjacent to the great hall, meant for private consultations, was now a nerve center of paranoia. The oil lamps flickered, casting long, nervous shadows over the faces of the three people Alder trusted most. Master Elias, the royal physician, Mistress Lyra, the seer, and Sir Kel, the captain of the royal guard. Tell me again, Elias. Alder paced the room with the kinetic energy of a caged lion. Master Elias hunched over a crude map of the great hall, adjusted his spectacles. The poison was not in the wine, your majesty. We tested the king's evil and the communal barrels. It was in the bread, specifically the rye trenchers cut for the head of the table. Lord Cassian reached for one the moment before the incident, and it was intended for me, Alder finished flatly, running a hand over the still damp rim of his spent cup. In medieval court, bread was often used as a plate, served only to the most important guests. Poisoning the trencher was a direct, calculated attack on the crown. Sir Kel, a granite-faced knight whose loyalty was his only virtue, interjected. If the Northmen were the target, they would have poisoned the communal dishes, sire, the communal wine. This targets only those within 2 chairs of the throne. Precisely, Alder muttered. He looked at Mistress Lyra. So, Lyra, a king's ambition, but his servant's cloak. Who holds both? Lyra's eyes were distant. The great lords seek to supplant you openly, sire. The marks with Baliners. The one who loses poison seeks to discredit you, to sow internal chaos, to remove the cornerstone so the temple collapses on itself. Look not for the man who wants the crown, but the man who wants the reins.
The king couldn't trust his own court, but he couldn't execute the suspects without confirming their guilt, which would lead to political suicide. He needed someone disposable, intelligent, and unconnected to the current political landscape to investigate. Kale, Alder said, who is the lowest life in the castle with the sharpest mind? Someone who has no political affiliation, no love for any lord, and an instinct for rats. Kale hesitated, a flicker of distaste crossing his face. There is only one such man, sire. Oswald, the assistant keeper of the royal archives. He is a clerk, half-blind, who catalogued the royal tax accounts for a decade. He knows every lie, every land swap, and every hidden ledger entry of every lord in Viridia. The court despises him. He has nothing to lose and everything to gain from our favor. Oswald,
Alder repeated, a thin smile touching his lips. A perfect, invisible serpent. He will be my eyes and ears. Bring him. Tell no one, not even the prince. The next morning, the sun was bright, but the Castle Aldermount was enveloped in an unnatural gloom. The court moved in harsh and nervous groups, casting wary glances at one another. Prince Edric, still pale and shaken, stood in a private chapel, gazing at the stone effigy of his grandfather, King Theron, the unitier of the realm. Edric was 14, an age when medieval boys were expected to be riding into their first skirmish, yet he was happiest reading treatises of Roman law. His tutor, Maester Uriel, found him there. Uriel was a man of the cloth, a scholarly figure who had overseen Edric's education in history and theology. "Your Highness, your father has requested you attend him," Uriel said softly. "I cannot," Edric replied, his voice barely audible. "I fear the whole. I fear everyone. I saw Cassigan fall next. The look in his eyes, I cannot unsee it." "That is the very lesson, Prince," Uriel said, his tone shifting from gentle to didactic. "The crown is not merely a piece of gold. It is a burden of paranoia and survival. Your father expects you to study the danger, not shrink from it. Every man and woman in this castle is now a footnote in a deadly history. You must learn to read them." Edric's isolation was deepening. His natural timidity, contrasted with the brutal falls of the king, was becoming a subject of dangerous court gossip. He started seeing threats everywhere. The way a Stugald held a jug, the sudden cough of a passing guard. He began meticulously charting the movements of people in the hall, not out of investigation, but out of sheer debilitating fear. His chart, a spider web of meanings and locations, would later prove to be an invaluable, unintentional record. Master Elias, the physician, worked deep in his subterranean dispensary, a place smelling strongly of sulphur, dried herbs, and fear. The room was illuminated by a single iron lamp, casting deep shadows over his workbench that looked more like tools of torture than healing. He was performing the most advanced form of toxicology available in the 12th century, heavily influenced by translated Arabic medical texts. Elias crossed the poisoned red, or trencher, mixed it with vinegar, and boiled it down. He then performed a crude rinse test using a piece of shiny copper wire suspended in its solution. The sulphur, boy!" He snapped at his nervous apprentice, Pip. When the wire was removed, it was darkened with a distinctive silvery white coating. Elias examined it under his magnification glass. "Not crude arsenic, Pip. This residual is too volatile, too quick-acting. This is a blend, or a pigmentor, arsenic trisulfide with a quick, sharp death, masked with perhaps tincture of wolfsbane the convulsant. It smells finely of garlic and almonds, lightly hidden in the intense spices of the bread itself. Poison mixture equals were a pigmentorm, quick agent, plus a conting convulsant." The poisoner was no common murderer, or someone with high-level alchemical or apothecary knowledge, suggesting a physician, a scholar, or someone with access to extremely rare controlled substance. This immediately narrowed the suspect to the intellectual elite of the court, not a common soldier or baron. Oswald, the archive keeper, was a sight to behold. Them hunched, wearing thick grimed spectacles, and moving with the silent efficiency of a shadow. He had been given a royal seal and a terrifying new authority. He started, as instructed, with the service staff, the most disposable people, but the ones with the most access. He moved to the royal kitchen, a chaotic, vast space full of roaring fires, hanging meats, and sweating scullions. Oswald questioned Savy 10, a a man whose pride was only surpassed by his girth. "Who prepared the trencher bread?" Oswald asked, his voice to rest. "I oversaw it, that the flour was proven. The dough was mixed by 5 different hands. It is impossible." Oswald ignored him and turned to the royal taster, Lord Giles. In medieval courts, the taster tasted every dish and drink before the tinning. "Lord Giles," Oswald queried, referring to Edric's notes, "you tasted the king's slate. You ate the bread. Why did you not collapse?" Giles stuttered, pulling at his velvet car. I was distracted, good sir. I had a dreadful cough. I only took a small sliver of the trencher bread, and not the main slice. I coughed, and the king waved me aside." Oswald's eyes, magnified by his glasses, narrowed. A dreadful cough saved the lives of the taster who was meant to die for the king. Suspiciously convenient. The taster was now the prime suspect for either complicity or carelessness. But could a law-ranking nobleman like Giles access accounting? Queen Elna, a woman known for her piety and political neutrality, summoned Oswald to her private chambers. The room was opulent. The atmosphere was thick with fear and jasmine. "You are the king's new eye, archivist," she stated, her hands tossed technically. "I will upbraid you what the others will not. The truth of the routine." The queen was meticulous. She revealed a crucial, fact-rich detail about the serving ritual. The right trencher was lifted immediately before serving by the king confer. Sir Thomas was a loyal knight. The slices were placed on a specific silver tray, which was carried by one man only, Merrick, the head steward. The head steward served me first, then the prince, then the king, then Cassian, and so on. But thus knowledge the prince refused the wine, and I was speaking with Baron-elect. Not the cousin before the king by Warren's 5. A deviation of 2 seconds, archivist, saves mine husband's life. Oswald realized the point of administration. The window of opportunity was tiny between the carving and the serving. The boy's man had to be the carver, said Thomas, or the steward, Merrick. He hadn't been deemed a suspect.
Oswald's true specialty was not crime, but ledgers. He returned to the archives and began sifting through Cassian's private correspondence. The deceased chamberlain was a meticulous man, and Oswald found a packet of heavily coded letters hidden beneath a false bottom in his personal strongbox. The code was complex, using ancient, obscure Roman numerals for letters. It took Oswald a sleepless night to decipher the core of the message. The letters were addressed to Duke Renard, a powerful, aging duke in the far west marches who controlled vast gold and silver mines, the wealth that financed Alder's wars. The T-coded message revealed a sophisticated plot. Cassian was preparing a series of documents proving the king was siphoning off Duke Renard's Pax revenue for personal debts. They planned to present the evidence to the assembled barons to force Alder's abdication, replacing him with a more pliable, distant cousin, rather than assassinate him. Lord Cassian was not a loyal servant. He was a traitor planning a bloodless coup. But if he was planning abdication, why would he be poisoned? Oswald deduced 2 possibilities. 1, the poison was meant for the king, and the poisoner was unaware of Cassian's plot. 2, the poison was meant for Cassian, because someone else wanted to ensure the planned abdication plot never saw the light of day. This shifted the focus. The murder was either a direct attack on the king or a purge of a competing conspiracy. Before Oswald could report his findings, a horrifying new development swept through the castle. Sir Thomas, the royal carver, one of Oswald's prime suspects from the serving ritual, was found dead in his bedchamber. Unlike Cassian's dramatic public end, this was quiet and sinister. Sir Cale, who secured the scene, reported the cause. "Sire, no outward signs of violence, but Elias says his face was contorted, and the bedding was pulled tight around his neck. A pillow and a strong arm, perhaps. Suffocation. It happened hours ago." The implication was clear. The poisoner was not merely a killer, but a meticulous cleaner of threads. Sir Thomas was silenced before Oswald could question him. This eliminated one high-access suspect, but confirmed the killer was still among the confined guests and was bold enough to commit a second, more intimate murder under the cloak of the lockdown. The game had accelerated. The fear and suspicion were exactly what Baron Alaric needed. He used the chaos as leverage. During an uncomfortable small council meeting, with everyone wary of sharing drink or even breath, Alaric slammed his fist down. "Two bodies in 2 days, your majesty, while we are locked in your cage. This castle is a sieve, run by a king who cannot keep control of his own silver or his own carver. What use is peace with the north when you are at war with your own furniture?" Alaric pressed his demands, exploiting the king's distraction. Immediate formalized control of the northern borderland, a massive concession. The disbanding of the royal road tax, a major blow to the king's treasury. King Alder was caught between the rock of political necessity and the hard place of a hidden assassin. He had to yield to Alaric to prevent a war. The poisoner was not just killing people. They were actively deconstructing the king's power. "I accept your terms, Baron," Alaric ground out, his face a mask of fury. "But mark my words, when this serpent is crushed, I will revisit these terms with a sharper pen and a longer memory." Oswald, under immense pressure, returned to his two remaining key suspects, Merrick, the head steward who carried the tray, and Lord Giles, the taster who survived the bread. He cornered Giles in the chapel, away from prying eyes. "Lord Giles," Oswald's quiet voice was dangerous, "you survived the poison. I know you were talking to Sir Thomas the Carver moments before Cassian died. Now Thomas is dead. Did you help the poisoner, or did you simply see him?" Giles broke. He fell to his knees, weeping. "I saw him. I swear I did not help. Sir Thomas was distracted by a conversation with Lord Valence, the king's advisor on finances. Valence was complaining about the placement of the napkins. Thomas bent low to assure him it was a perfect screen. And when Thomas straightened, a man moved quickly behind him just as he placed the sliced bread onto the serving tray." "Who?" Oswald demanded. Giles pointed a shaking finger toward the main court gathering in the courtyard below, where the nobles were nervously socializing. "It was Sergeant Leduc of the king's own personal guard. He was standing near the wall behind the serving station, but he shouldn't have been there. I remember, because he was wearing a strangely darkened sleeve, almost black, on his left arm. A sergeant in the Royal Guard, access to the most secured area of the hall, but no apparent political motive. A trusted man, hiding in plain sight, with a strange distinguishing mark. Oswald had his man, or at least the instrument of the deed." Oswald sprinted toward the king's solar, breathless and disheveled.
ignoring the glares of Sir Kell. He laid out the terrifying narrative for King Alder, Master Elias, and Mistress Lyra. The decoded letters proving Cassian's abdication plot, the sophisticated aconite arsenic blend, the murder of the carver, and finally the identification of the two key figures, Sergeant Leduc and Lord Vaillant, a soldier and a financier. Alder mused, his hand stroking his beard, his face a stone cold. Vaillant is rich, but he is a commoner by blood. He has no claim to the throne. Leduc has his loyalty to the uniform. This makes no sense. Mistress Lyra stepped forward, her gaze intense. It makes perfect sense, Your Majesty. You asked for ambition under a servant's cloak. Vaillant craves not the crown, but the sanctity of the realm. He is the head of the serpent. Lyra brought forth the small, leather-bound volume from her sleeve and pointed to a detailed woodcut of a stylized black five-petaled flower. The emblem of the Black Rose, Lyra explained, her voice dropping to a conspiratory whisper. An extremist cell comprised primarily of wealthy merchants, tax collectors, and scholars who believed that the monarchy, built on wars, debt, and political maneuvering, is inherently corrupt. They believed that only by purging the throne can Berea return to a state of divine purity, ruled by a council of the pious, not a king of war.
Valence controls the royal treasury, Alder realized, his eyes widening. Your recent tax reforms, sire, were cutting directly into their hidden sources of wealth, their illegal levies, and their influence over the merchant guilds. Cassian was killed because his plot for abdication was too slow, too messy. They sought regicide to create immediate chaos and shock the nobles into accepting a swift, council-led transition of power. Leduc's dark sleeve, Giles had seen, was the embroidered mark of the Black Rose, hidden on his uniform. Valence, the respected financier, was the quiet zealot funding and directing the movement to overthrow the crown for ideological purity. Master Elias confirmed the scientific truth one last time. The bread, sire. Lord Cassian's portion had a visible darkening on the interior, a concentration of the sulfur-based poison that would have resulted in instant collapse. The slice next to it, your slice, had a slightly less potent but still lethal dose. The poison was designed to incapacitate the kin swiftly, making it appear as a natural fit or divine judgment, not a slow assassination. Alder took a deep, shuddering breath. Every action in the last 3 days had been a direct consequence of a plot orchestrated by his most trusted financial advisor. The Black Banquet was designed to decapitate the political structure, allowing the zealous, wealthy merchant class to seize power during the resulting chaos. Valence is a meticulous man, Alder stated, his voice now cold, calculating. He will have a contingency. He will be watching us, waiting to see if his agent Leduc is discovered. If Leduc is gone, Valence will flee with the treasury. We must use his meticulous nature against him, Lyra advised. He is a man of numbers, order, and rules. He will not expect chaos. King Alder orchestrated the scene with the precision of a battle plan. He announced a final, immediate council to be held in the Great Hall that evening to discuss the new road tax, the exact piece of legislation that threatened Valence's syndicate. Only a handful of key individuals were invited: Valence, Baron Alaric, Prince Edric, and 2 other neutral lords. The setup: 1. The bait:
A large silver-mounted ledger, the royal accounting book, was placed prominently on the king's table, containing the newly drafted tax law that would cripple the Black Rose's income. True, the lure. Alder publicly announced that he would use the council to sign the final draft that very night, cementing the law. 3. The snare. Sir Cale and his best wardens were hidden in the minstrel's gallery and behind the tapestries, their positions strategically chosen to eliminate any possible escape or armed resistance. When Lord Valence entered, he wore a thin, nervous smile. He was the picture of courtly order, his velvet immaculate. He immediately gravitated towards the ledger. King Alder began the council discussing the minutiae of the tax law. After 10 minutes of excruciating detail, the king suddenly stopped, looking directly at Valence. "Lord Valence," Alder said, "before I sign this document, tell me, do you believe this law serves the highest purity of Viridia, or does it merely feed the corruption of the crown?" Valence, believing the king was seeking political counsel, launched into a prepared, passionate condemnation of the king's financial policies, an echo of the Black Rose ideology. "Your Majesty, these taxes are a plague. They are unjust. They line the wrong pockets, and they violate the principles of enough," Alder interrupted, his voice like a whip cracked. I pointed to the empty space where Cassian had collapsed. "You did not want reform, Valence. You wanted the throne vacant. You saw the crown as corrupt, so you stunted those of arsenic and wolfsbane to make your judgment swift." Valence's composure fractured. He tried to claim ignorance, but Alder silenced him. "I know about the Black Rose. I know you used Sergeant Leduc to deliver the poison and then silenced Sir Thomas. Your ideology required the chaos, not just the death. But your greed for order betrayed you. You are a man who thinks in lines and ledgers. You cannot tolerate loose ends." Valence lunged, not for a weapon, but for the open ledger, intending to destroy the tax laws and potentially evidence. "Stop him," Alder warned. Cale and the wardens descended. Valence was wrestled to the floor, his struggles replaced by gutter of fanatic shouts about divine government and a corrupted kingdom. It was a humiliating, violent end to a powerful man who sought to rule through quiet conspiracy. Valence was stripped of his titles and wealth, and his trial was immediate, public, and brutal. It was a quintessential example of medieval justice, swift and focused on restoring the king's authority. The evidence was overwhelming. Oswald's decoded letters, Master Elias's scientific confirmation of the specific poison found in Valence's hidden apothecary, with the same unique sulfur-based blend, and the testimony of Lord Giles. The king leveraged the trial to send a resounding message to the entire kingdom. The crime was not just murder, it was sacrilege against the crown. Valence was drawn and quartered for high treason. On the day of his execution, he stood, defiant, proclaiming his actions as necessary for the soul of Viridia. His final terrible spectacle was designed to crush the Black Rose movement at its core and remind every noble, including Baron Alaric, who watched in cold silence, that the king's life was sacrosanct. The aftermath of the Black Banquet was a cold, hard reset for the realm. The Black Rose. The king used Valence's seized ledgers to identify and arrest dozens of merchants and minor nobles affiliated with this act. The movement was dismantled quickly, its wealth absorbed by the crown, shoring up Alder's depleted treasury. Prince Edric. The traumatic events had a profound effect. He no longer retreated into his books purely out of timidity, but out of a need for strategy. He began studying not just Roman law, but the history of poison, counter-espionage, and treasury management. When his father asked him what was to be done about the court internal security, Edric gave a surprising answer. "We must stop trusting in loyalty, father. Loyalty is bought or coerced. We must create a system of distrust. Appoint 3 treasury ministers, each reporting only to you, each unaware of the full account. Appoint 3 separate chiefs of guard, all with overlapping jurisdictions. Let them watch each other. Let the system ensure its own purity, not the character of the men." Alder looked at his son, no longer pale and scholarly, but suddenly shrewd and cynical. The Black Banquet had forged the heir he needed. Weeks later, the great hall was thoroughly scrubbed, blessed by priests, and prepared for a new, small feast. This time the dinner was quiet, intimate, and starkly different. There were no elaborate trencher breads. The king and queen ate from individual covered silver plates, and their wine was poured from a single bottle and tasted 3 times by different individuals before reaching their lips. Baron Ilaric had secured his concessions, and ironically was now a staunch and, if temporary, ally. The stability brought by the brutal execution of Valens had proven the king's ability to maintain order, a stability Alaric valued more than continued war. The fragile peace held, but it was a colder, more cynical peace. The King Alder raises his cup not for a toast, but simply to acknowledge the presence of his son and his closest advisers. "The crown is not gold," Alder said, looking directly at Edric.
It is not power. It is a burden of perpetual scrutiny. The Black Banquet taught us that the greatest threats wear the thickest velvet and hold the deepest conviction. He put the cup down, untouched. The king was a survivor, but one permanently altered by the venom of treachery. He had faced down a powerful barony and a shadowy conspiracy. He had survived not by strength of arms, but by realizing that the invisible intellectual threats, the poison, the code, the ideology, were the true dangers of his era. The legacy of the Black Banquet was not death, but paranoia. A vigilant, necessary paranoia that would define King Alder's reign for the next decade, making him a harder, more secure, and ultimately a more enduring ruler.